It was 11:23 p.m., and Anna was finishing a meeting. That's what her last text had said, anyway. I stared at the phone screen, waiting for the typing dots to appear, but nothing. I knew better than to call. I'd tried that once, and she'd snapped at me about being clingy. That was 2 months ago, around the time her out-of-town trips had started picking up speed. She'd always had an ambitious side, so I wanted to be supportive. After all, her career was important to her. But tonight, something felt off. I wasn't the jealous type, or at least I didn't think so. But lately, there was a strange rhythm to these trips. Always last minute, always essential, always followed by nights when she'd come home exhausted and barely acknowledge me. She used to tell me everything, write down how her meetings had gone or the details of her flights. Now, just cryptic texts like, got a busy day, talk soon. Tonight, that nagging feeling hit harder than usual. She was supposed to be at a conference in Denver, but when I called her hotel to send flowers, they had no record of her reservation. I tried calling her cell again, straight to voicemail. Pacing around our living room, I noticed a small suitcase tucked behind the couch. It was her backup bag, the one she always left packed for emergencies. But there was something sticking out of it this time, something I hadn't seen before. I reached for it, and my heart started pounding as I pulled out a sleek, black lace dress I'd never seen her wear. One that was, well, more suited for a date night than a business trip. I tried to breathe, to calm down, to think rationally. There had to be an explanation. Maybe she packed it in case of a dinner or something. But as the minutes ticked by, that simple reassurance felt thinner and thinner. Just as I was about to put the dress back, my phone buzzed. Anna, sorry my phone died. Just back to the room now. She didn't explain why her meeting had dragged on so late or why she hadn't charged her phone. There was no real apology, just a quick note, as if she was sending it out of obligation. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold weight settle into my gut. What meeting was it? I texted back, trying to keep things casual. But her reply didn't come, and the longer I sat there, the more I felt like I was a fool for even asking. I didn't sleep that night. All I could think of was that lace dress, hidden in plain sight, like she'd been mocking me with it. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was all in my head. But I couldn't ignore the unease that had been growing, trip after trip, late night after late night. It was time for answers. The next morning, I woke up with that same sick feeling in my stomach. I told myself to let it go, to wait for Anna to come home and ask her calmly, like two adults. But that wasn't enough anymore. Something in me had shifted, some nagging instinct that kept poking me in the ribs, whispering that she was hiding something dark, something deliberate. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I started checking her social media. Anna's accounts were clean, perfectly curated photos, the occasional work update, travel shots that made her life look exciting and just a little bit out of reach. But I knew people sometimes slipped up. Maybe there'd be a clue. Nothing. Every post, every caption, every smiling selfie seemed so polished. And suddenly, it felt like I was looking at a stranger. Who was this person, this Anna that everyone thought they knew? I was sitting there, scrolling through her carefully curated Instagram, when a notification popped up on my phone. Anna had tagged herself at a restaurant in Denver. But the time didn't add up. It was marked at 8 p.m., right when she'd told me she was in her late meeting. My hands shook as I opened the post. It was a simple shot of her glass of wine, captioned, "Networking nightcap." Networking my ass. What bothered me most wasn't even the lie itself. It was how easily she'd posted it, the way she used social media as a prop, a cover for whatever was really going on. As if, with a click of a button, she could fool anyone who cared to look a little deeper. I couldn't sit with it. Not any longer. That evening, when Anna finally came home, she barely looked at me as she dropped her bag by the door. She was tired, she said, and needed to unwind. I watched her settle onto the couch, scrolling through her phone, looking as calm and casual as if she hadn't just lied to me for an entire weekend. I sat across from her, silent, trying to find my words. They seemed to stick in my throat, refusing to come out right. I wanted to scream, demand answers, but something in her nonchalance froze me in place. Instead, I just watched her, looking for some sign of guilt, some flicker of the woman I thought I'd married. When she finally looked up, I was caught off guard by her gaze, It was like she was seeing right through me. For a second, it was almost as if she knew what I was thinking. She arched an eyebrow, her face barely concealing a flicker of irritation. "Are you okay? You look tense," she said, voice dripping with an almost imperceptible sarcasm. I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my cool. "Just tired, I guess. It's been a long weekend." She just nodded, disinterested. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, "Did you miss me?" Something snapped inside me. I felt my face twist into a bitter smile before I could stop myself. "I don't know, Anna. Did you miss me?" She looked confused for a second, really genuinely confused. But then, just as quickly, her expression shifted back to that cool, impassive stare, and she gave a half-smile. "Of course I did," she said lightly, as if she couldn't imagine why I'd even ask. I wanted to scream, wanted to tear through every single lie, every bit of trust she destroyed with a few well-placed words. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at her, wondering how long she'd been getting away with this. How many nights I'd lain awake, waiting for her to call, while she'd been out networking. Finally, she stood up, her face already turning away from me. "I'm going to take a shower. Long day." And just like that, she disappeared down the hallway, leaving me alone with my anger. I stayed rooted to the spot, letting the silence press down on me, trying to make sense of what my life had turned into. Temptation, betrayal, trust. Words I thought I understood until now. I'd loved her, trusted her more than anyone, and she'd thrown it back in my face. For what? A few fleeting moments with someone new? A thrill? And then I realized, if she was capable of lying so smoothly, so easily, what else was she hiding? What other secrets were lurking just beneath the surface, buried under that perfect smile? As I sat there, I knew I'd crossed a line. The suspicion had festered into something darker, something I couldn't just let go of. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to stop until I had them. The next morning, I left for work earlier than usual, but my mind was 1,000 miles away from the office. I moved through the day in a haze, half-heartedly listening to meetings, nodding along to conversations I could barely process. Anna's deception hung over me like a storm cloud, dark and oppressive. I couldn't shake the image of her, smiling, pretending to care, lying right to my face. I'd given her everything. I'd thought we were partners, that we shared something no one else could touch. But now, every memory felt tainted, and I was left with a hollow ache where my trust used to be. My phone buzzed mid-morning, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Anna. "Hey babe, thinking of you. Let's do something fun tonight. Just us." Her words were so casual, so normal, but instead of warmth, they sent a chill down my spine. This was the same woman who'd lied to my face, who'd created an entire web of deceit, only to turn around and call me babe like nothing was wrong. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. By lunch, I couldn't take it anymore. I locked myself in an empty conference room and pulled out my phone. With a sense of dread, I opened our phone records online. I'd never checked them before. I'd never had a reason to. But now, as I scrolled through the list of calls and texts, I felt like a detective piecing together the crime. There it was, a number I didn't recognize, one that appeared over and over, especially during her out-of-town weekends. I copied it down, my fingers trembling. This was it. Proof. I went back to my desk and spent the rest of the day staring blankly at my screen, feeling like the walls were closing in on me. My whole life, my marriage had been a lie, and now I was holding the evidence in my hand. I had to confront her. I needed the truth, no matter how brutal. That night, I got home before her, pacing the living room, rehearsing the confrontation over and over in my head. But when she finally walked through the door, smiling like nothing had changed, I felt a sickening wave of doubt. What if I was wrong? What if there was an innocent explanation, and I was about to destroy our marriage over nothing? But then, as she leaned in to kiss me, I caught the faintest whiff of cologne, one that wasn't mine. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice colder than I'd intended. She looked taken aback, her smile fading. "Just had to run a quick errand after work." "Why?" My heart pounded, and I felt my composure slipping. "An errand?" And that errand involved wearing someone else's cologne. Her eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, laughing it off. What? You're being ridiculous, she said, rolling her eyes like I'd just made some kind of absurd joke. But I could see it. The flicker of panic, the way her hand tightened on her purse. Really? I said, my voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. How about the networking you did in Denver, Anna? Because when I called the hotel, they didn't even have you booked. Care to explain that? Her face turned pale, her usual calm cracking just for a second. She looked down, biting her lip, as if searching for the right lie. I stayed with a friend. The conference was overbooked. I told you it was just networking. But the words sounded hollow, empty. I shook my head, my chest tightening with hurt and betrayal. A friend. Right. And this friend. Do they know how to call you on this? I held up my phone, showing her the number I'd found in our records. Her face drained of all color. She looked away, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. For a long moment, we stood in silence, the air thick with unspoken words, shattered trust, and a sense of finality that cut deeper than any fight we'd ever had. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. She looked up, her eyes glistening with tears, but there was no remorse in them, only fear of being caught. It didn't mean anything. I felt something inside me snap, a painful, irreversible break. Didn't mean anything. I repeated, each word laced with bitter disbelief. You lied to me, made me question everything we built for something that didn't mean anything. She looked down, unable to meet my gaze, her silence confessing what she couldn't say out loud. And that's when I knew, deep in my bones, that she'd broken something that couldn't be fixed. I turned away, my mind racing with everything I'd just learned, and a bitter, twisted sense of clarity washed over me. I knew what I had to do. The old me, the one who'd trusted, who'd believed in loyalty, was gone. What was left was something colder, sharper, and I would make sure she felt every bit of what she'd done. After Anna's hollow apology, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, reliving every lie, every look, every distant "I love you" she'd uttered over the last few months. My mind churned, drifting between painful memories and cold calculations. Part of me just wanted to confront her, to finally explode and let all the anger rip through the silence. But another part, darker and more calculating, wanted to play a longer game. It was around 3 a.m. when I felt the first hint of a plan taking shape. I got up quietly, leaving Anna asleep in the bed, her breathing calm and steady, as if the betrayal hadn't even touched her. She looked peaceful, like a stranger I'd once known, someone whose lies hadn't yet reached me. It was a cruel irony, really. The woman who destroyed my trust lay there, completely unaware that everything was about to change. I went to my office and closed the door, turning on my computer. I'd never been the vengeful type before, but that person, the trusting, oblivious husband, was gone. This new version of me was willing to do whatever it took to make sure Anna felt the same devastation she'd inflicted on me. I opened her social media accounts, scouring them for any trace of Jake, the man she'd been texting late at night. He wasn't in her photos, but I found him quickly enough through her tag contacts. His profile was private, but his bio read, "Live fast, love hard." I nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. Here he was, this stranger who'd waltzed into my marriage, ruining everything I'd built, and he was parading around with some macho, dime store motto. I dug deeper, noting his mutual connections, some shared acquaintances between him and Anna. I wanted to know everything about this guy, who he was, where he worked, how he'd managed to seduce my wife without a second thought. An idea crossed my mind, one that grew with each click through his friends list. Anna and I had friends in common with Jake, colleagues from her job, a few old university friends. And these connections could be my way in. The next morning, I played my part perfectly, acting subdued but forgiving, letting her believe that her apology had been enough to settle things. I told her I just needed some time, that I wanted to work through this together. She looked relieved, a flash of guilt in her eyes quickly replaced by a comfortable smile. "I understand," she said, reaching for my hand. Inside, I felt a wave of disgust, but I forced myself to keep calm, to smile back like we were the same old couple. I knew she'd bought it, and that's when I felt the first taste of control again. If she wanted to act like we were fine, I'd let her, right up until the moment she lost everything. In the days that followed, I kept my distance, staying late at work, keeping our conversations light, pretending to be focused on healing. But at night, when she thought I was asleep, I would dig further into her life with Jake, piecing together each message, every hidden rendezvous, until I knew their affair as well as I'd once known our marriage. Eventually, I found exactly what I needed. Jake's company was holding a corporate event, something semi-formal, with a few key figures in Anna's industry invited to attend. She'd mentioned it once in passing, describing it as another boring networking thing. But I checked the list, and her name was on it. I felt my pulse quicken as I realized what I could do. If she wanted to network, I'd give her the audience she deserved. On the night of the event, I told her I was working late, that I'd be home around midnight. She barely looked up from the mirror as she applied her lipstick, slipping into a sleek black dress that made my blood boil. That dress was for him, not for me. She leaned over to kiss my cheek, a soft, practiced gesture that now felt like a slap in the face. Once she was gone, I changed quickly, sliding into a suit and driving to the event. I parked across the street, close enough to see the entrance, and waited, anticipation thick in my chest. When she arrived, she didn't see me, but I caught a glimpse of her, laughing with that same carefree ease, just like the woman I'd once loved. And then Jake showed up, tall, confident, with that same swagger I'd seen in his profile. He greeted her with a smile that spoke volumes, the kind of look a man gives to a woman he thinks is his. I felt a surge of satisfaction watching him, oblivious to the storm I was about to unleash. With a deep breath, I strode toward the entrance, slipping in as another guest held the door open. Anna was right there, barely 10 feet away, laughing and sipping her drink beside Jake. And in that moment, I knew exactly how I would make them pay. As I slipped into the dimly lit venue, I took a moment to get my bearings. Clusters of people gathered around small tables, chatting and laughing over drinks, oblivious to the darkness lurking right beneath the surface. My eyes scanned the room until I spotted her, Anna, leaning against a high-top table, her hand lightly resting on Jake's forearm. She was smiling, that same effortless smile she used to flash at me, the one that always made me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. It turned my stomach. I watched from the shadows, noting every detail. She was dressed to kill, her black dress hugging her in a way that wasn't meant for a networking event. Jake leaned in, his hand resting a little too familiarly on her back, and she tilted her head, laughing at whatever he'd said. For a moment, I almost walked out, unable to stand another second of this twisted theater. But the desire for revenge was stronger, pushing me forward. In my pocket was a small flash drive, the key to the plan I'd been orchestrating. I had spent days compiling every message, every suggestive photo she'd sent, every piece of evidence I could find. And now, with a few keystrokes, I was about to show her that betrayal comes at a cost. After a quick scan of the room, I spotted the AV setup in the corner, where a technician was adjusting the projector for a company slideshow. Perfect. I took a deep breath, feeling the thrill of what I was about to do, the tension building up like a spring coiled tight. I approached the AV tech, keeping my expression casual. "Hey," I said, leaning in, "I'm actually on the guest list, and I have a quick video presentation that was supposed to be part of the program tonight. Do you mind if I load it up real quick?" The technician looked at me skeptically. "I wasn't told about any extra presentations." I flashed a confident smile, improvising. "Yeah, I know. It was a last-minute addition. You know how these corporate events are," I added with a roll of my eyes, hoping he'd recognize that I was just another beleaguered professional dealing with disorganized event planners. With a sigh, he relented, motioning for me to hand over the flash drive. I passed it to him, and he inserted it into the laptop without a second glance. He pulled up the video file labeled innocuously enough as annual recap. With one last look at Anna and Jake, completely unaware, I gave him the nod. The lights dimmed, and the crowd hushed, shifting their attention to the projector screen as the video began. At first, It was a simple slideshow, a series of pictures that looked corporate enough, a few generic office shots, the company's logo. But then, halfway through, the images started to change. The photos were no longer of boardrooms or business functions. They were selfies of Anna in hotel rooms, the same red dress I'd found in her suitcase draped over her body, her face tilted toward the camera in a suggestive pout. The timestamps were unmistakable, each one aligned perfectly with her out-of-town conferences. A murmur rippled through the crowd as people began to realize what they were seeing. The photos turned into screenshots of messages. "I can't wait to see you tonight." One read, followed by a stream of explicit exchanges that left no doubt about what was going on. The murmur turned into gasps, some stifled laughter, and even a few uncomfortable coughs. Anna's face went pale as the images played out in front of her colleagues and friends, each new message a blow. Her eyes darted frantically around the room, then froze when she saw me standing at the back, watching her crumble. Jake's face went slack, and he tried to shield her, his arm wrapping protectively around her shoulder. But she shook him off, her expression morphing from horror to pure fury as she locked eyes with me. She took a step toward me, but I stood my ground, letting the entire room witness the fallout of her lies. The last slide was a photo I'd taken from her phone. One of her and Jake in a cozy, dimly lit restaurant, both of them laughing, her hand on his. She'd sent it to him with a caption that read, "Can't wait for next time." The projector clicked off, and the lights flickered back on, bathing the room in silence. Anna's chest rose and fell rapidly, her expression a mixture of rage, shame, and pleading desperation. She looked at me, opening her mouth to say something, anything, to undo what had just happened. But I didn't need to hear her excuses. I'd already seen enough. Without a word, I turned and walked out, leaving her behind with her shame, her guilt, and the ruin she'd brought upon herself. There would be no more apologies, no more lies. Just the cold reality of a woman who had lost everything and had no one to blame but herself. As I left the event, I felt a surge of vindication wash over me, but it was hollow, more like relief than satisfaction. It was as if I'd finally taken the knife out of my back, only to realize the wound was deeper than I'd expected. Outside, the cool night air hit me, and I inhaled, trying to cleanse myself of the scene that had just unfolded. But Anna's stunned face, the anger and hurt in her eyes, stuck with me like a bruise. I walked to my car, the silence of the parking lot pressing in on me. I thought I'd feel triumphant, powerful even, after seeing her exposed like that. But as I gripped the steering wheel, a new feeling crept in, one I hadn't anticipated: loneliness. I drove aimlessly, not ready to go home to the empty house, the quiet that had always been a comfort, but now felt suffocating. For years, I'd built a life with Anna, investing in dreams and promises, the kind of life you think will last forever. But now, the foundation had crumbled, and all I had left were the shattered pieces. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Anna. I let it ring, watching her name flash across the screen, knowing that answering would only lead to more lies, more manipulations. But the buzzing didn't stop. She kept calling, again and again, as if desperately trying to cling to whatever scraps of control she still thought she had. Finally, I answered, my voice low and cold. "What do you want, Anna?" She hesitated, her breath hitching on the other end. I don't even know what to say. How could you do that to me?" I laughed, a bitter sound that felt foreign in my own mouth. "How could I do that to you? Are you really going to play the victim here, Anna? After everything you did?" Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I thought she might start crying, but her tone quickly turned defensive. "You didn't have to humiliate me in front of everyone like that. That was private, between you and me. We could have handled this differently." Handled it differently? My grip tightened on the steering wheel as I fought to keep my voice steady. "You think this was just about you and me? You betrayed me, Anna. You betrayed us. And the worst part? You acted like it was nothing. Like I was nothing." There was silence on her end, and I could almost picture her, standing there in the wreckage of the life she'd destroyed. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, vulnerable. I never meant to hurt you. I was a lost. It just happened. That phrase again, it just happened. As if she had tripped and fallen into an affair, as if every choice, every lie, every whispered promise to someone else was an accident. I could feel the anger simmering beneath the hurt, twisting tighter and tighter, refusing to release me. You know what, Anna? I said, my voice low and calm. Maybe you should take some time to think about what just happened. Because I'm done. I hung up before she could respond, tossing my phone onto the passenger seat, feeling a strange sense of finality. It was over. I had no interest in her apologies, her excuses, or her pleas. Whatever love I'd had for her, whatever trust, had dissolved completely, leaving nothing but resentment and exhaustion. I kept driving, not caring about the direction, just needing to escape. Eventually, I found myself on a quiet overlook outside of town, a spot we'd once visited together. It had been our favorite place to come and clear our heads, to talk through anything and everything. Now it felt tainted, a symbol of all the lies and broken promises that had brought me here. Sitting there, staring into the empty night, I felt the full weight of everything come crashing down. I'd loved her, trusted her, built my whole life around her. I'd given her parts of myself I didn't know I had, and she'd taken it all, only to discard me when it suited her. And yet, beneath the anger and hurt, a flicker of something else surfaced, relief. She was out of my life now. Whatever pain lay ahead, it was mine to face alone, without the shadow of her betrayal hanging over me. I could rebuild, start fresh, find something real, something that couldn't be taken away with a few lies and an affair. As I sat there, I realized that my journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. There would be no quick fix, no instant relief from the hurt. But I was free, finally free to let go of the past and rebuild on my own terms. For the first time in a long time, I felt something like hope. The days after the showdown at the event passed in a surreal blur. I'd cut all contact with Anna, ignoring her calls and texts, even as they piled up like the debris of our broken life together. Each message was another jab at the wounds I was trying to heal, so I left them unread. If she had anything left to say, it was too little, too late. But it wasn't as easy as I'd hoped to shut her out. Memories crept in, uninvited and relentless, as if my mind refused to let go of the love I'd had for her. Some nights, I'd lie awake replaying the good moments, wondering how many of them had been tainted by her lies. I thought back to our vacations, our late-night conversations, the quiet mornings when we'd sit with coffee, sharing comfortable silence. Each memory had become a ghost, haunting me with what could have been if only things had turned out differently. One afternoon, I decided to clear out some of her things from the house. The first few hours went smoothly. I tossed out old clothes, sorted through her books, even boxed up the souvenirs we'd collected over the years. But then I came across a photo album I hadn't seen in ages, buried deep in a drawer. It was from the early days, back when everything felt simple and real, back before any cracks had appeared. I sat on the floor, flipping through page after page of us smiling together, holding hands, laughing. Our honeymoon in Italy, where we danced in the piazzas late at night, buzzed on cheap wine and reckless promises. Our first Christmas together in the tiny apartment we could barely afford. Each page held a piece of the life we'd built together, a life I thought would last forever. I turned another page, and a photo slipped out, falling onto the floor. It was a candid shot of us, taken by a friend at a barbecue years ago. We were laughing, arms wrapped around each other, looking so natural, so happy. I stared at it, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and grief. How could she have thrown all of this away? How could she have looked me in the eye every day, said she loved me, while hiding so much? My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. Another text from Anna, one of the many I hadn't opened. But this time, instead of ignoring it, I gave in and read it. Please, can we just talk? Just one conversation. That's all I'm asking. I clenched my jaw, torn between anger and a reluctant sense of obligation. There was a time, not too long ago, when she was the person I'd promised to give everything to, through good and bad. Maybe I owed her one last conversation. Against my better judgment, I texted back, "Fine. Tomorrow at noon. We'll talk." The next day, I sat at a cafe near the park, sipping coffee and feeling a mixture of dread and anticipation. She walked in, scanning the room before spotting me. For a brief second, her face softened in relief, like she'd just seen an old friend. But I didn't smile back. Anna sat down, her hands clasped tightly, her gaze shifting between me and the table. She looked like she'd aged in the last few days, shadows under her eyes, her usual confidence replaced by something fragile. It almost made me pity her. Almost. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, her voice barely a whisper. I just nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Say what you need to say, Anna." She took a deep breath, her eyes shimmering. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to understand. I wanted you to know that it wasn't about you. It was about me, my own selfishness, my own insecurities. I got lost somewhere along the way, and I thought I could have both." I felt a bitter laugh rise up in my throat. "Have both? You wanted both me and him?" She flinched, her face reddening with shame. "No, it's not like that. I thought I could compartmentalize, keep things separate. But I was wrong. So wrong." She looked down, her voice breaking. "I threw away everything good in my life for something that didn't mean anything." I wanted to shout, to tell her that her excuses meant nothing to me. But instead, I just looked at her, feeling more hollow than angry. "Do you even understand what you've done? The destruction you've left behind?" Tears slid down her cheeks as she nodded, her voice barely audible. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I ruined us, and I ruined you. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself." For a moment, the raw pain in her voice softened something in me. But it wasn't enough. I'd given her everything, and she'd tossed it aside as if it were nothing. And now, here she was looking to me to ease her own guilt. I stood up, slipping the photo of us laughing at the barbecue onto the table. She looked down at it, her face crumbling as she realized what it meant, what she'd lost. "I hope you find whatever you're looking for, Anna, but it won't be with me." And with that, I walked away, leaving her with the photo and the memories of what could have been. I walked away from Anna that day feeling lighter and yet more raw than ever. For the first time, I felt like I'd truly closed the door on her, like I'd finally released myself from the endless questions and self-doubt that had plagued me since the affair came to light. But even as I left her behind, the emptiness grew, settling in the spaces where love and trust had once lived. That night, I went home, poured a drink, and sat on the couch alone, letting the silence seep in. There was no pretending anymore, no one else to hold responsible. The damage was done, and the only person left to pick up the pieces was me. I'd always believed in the strength of love, in its ability to weather any storm. Anna and I had been through so much together, and I'd thought that bond was unbreakable. But now, I knew that trust was the real foundation of any relationship, and without it, love was just an empty promise. Her betrayal had taught me a lesson I never wanted to learn. Love can be conditional, and sometimes it's the conditions we don't see that matter most. In the days that followed, I threw myself into my work, trying to keep my mind off the gaping wound Anna had left behind. But even in the middle of meetings, as colleagues droned on about deadlines and projections, memories of her would sneak in. Her laughter, the way she used to lean into me when we watched movies, the feel of her hand in mine. Each memory felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder of everything I'd lost. One evening, I went for a run through the park near our house, hoping the physical exertion might dull the pain. The air was crisp, the trees bare, and the quiet was almost comforting. I pushed myself harder than usual, pounding out each step as if I could outrun the heartache, as if the wind on my face might carry away the remnants of Anna's betrayal. But as I ran, a strange thing happened. Somewhere between the 5th and 6th mile, the memories started to lose their grip. Her face faded into the blur of trees, her laughter replaced by the steady rhythm of my breathing. For the first time since everything had unraveled, I felt a glimmer of peace, the kind that comes from knowing you're still here, still standing, even after the worst. I slowed down, breathing deeply, my heart pounding in my chest. And for the first time, I realized that maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe this pain was just a step on the way to something better, something I couldn't see yet. That night, I sat down and wrote a letter to Anna. Not to send, but to release everything that had been building up inside me. The words I'd swallowed in silence, the anger and heartbreak I'd carried alone. I wrote about the future we'd once planned, the promises we'd made, and how it felt to watch them dissolve. But I also wrote about forgiveness, not for her, but for me. I wanted to forgive myself for trusting her, for believing in her, for loving her without reservation. I forgive myself. I wrote, the words feeling both foreign and liberating. I forgive myself for loving deeply, for trusting completely. I won't let your betrayal turn my heart cold. I won't let your choices define my capacity to love. As I wrote those words, I felt a shift, a release of the resentment and bitterness that had poisoned my thoughts. I had been holding on to her betrayal like it was a part of me, something I couldn't escape. But now, as I sat there in the quiet of my own home, I realized that it was her mistake, not mine, and I didn't have to carry it any longer. The days that followed weren't easy, but each one felt a little lighter. I let myself feel everything, the anger, the sadness, the hope for what might come next, without pushing it away. Slowly, the memories of her became less like wounds and more like scars, reminders of lessons learned, a map of a life that had shifted but not ended. One evening, as I looked out the window at the city lights, a quiet realization settled over me. I was free. Free from the lies, free from the guilt, free from the weight of what could have been. I had mourned the life we'd built, let myself grieve the future we'd never have, and somehow, through it all, I'd found a way back to myself. I still didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. In the weeks that followed, I started to rediscover life on my own terms. It wasn't easy. There were moments when grief would come in waves, leaving me stranded in memories I wasn't ready to face. But each day, I found myself dwelling less on the betrayal and more on who I was becoming in its aftermath. One weekend, I finally gathered the courage to delete the last traces of Anna from my life. Photos, messages, old love letters. Everything that once meant something now felt foreign, like relics of a life I'd barely recognize as my own. As I went through each item, I felt the sting of loss, but also a sense of liberation. Each picture, each token of affection was now a testament to a closed chapter, one I no longer felt chained to. It wasn't until I reached the last photo, though, that the full weight of my healing hit me. It was a picture from one of our earliest trips together, taken on a windy day at the beach. She was laughing, her hair blowing wildly around her face, and I was looking at her with a gaze so open, so trusting, that it nearly brought me to tears. That version of me had loved fearlessly, and even now, after everything, I couldn't regret that. I stared at the photo for a long time, finally understanding that while I could let her go, I didn't have to let go of who I'd been. That open-hearted man, the one who'd believed in love without walls or conditions. He was still there, under all the hurt and scars. That night, I walked down to the neighborhood bar I'd avoided since everything had happened. It was a place Anna and I had frequented together, so it was full of memories. I'd avoided it, not wanting to confront familiar faces or the inevitable awkward questions. But tonight I was ready. I wanted to take back my space, my freedom, even the places that once felt tainted. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the usual chatter and laughter. I took a seat at the bar, ordered a drink, and sat quietly, feeling the buzz of life around me. I didn't feel alone, not in the way I had before. In a strange way, I felt more connected to myself, as if all the noise and hurt had finally settled, leaving only a clear sense of who I was. As I sipped my drink, a voice interrupted my thoughts. "Is this seat taken?" I looked up to see a woman standing beside me, a friendly but hesitant smile on her face. She had an easy grace about her, nothing flashy or forced, just an openness that reminded me of something I hadn't seen in a while. I hesitated, then motioned to the seat, surprised by my own calmness. We introduced ourselves, and she told me her name was Mia. We talked about everything and nothing: work, movies, music, things that would have seemed trivial any other night but felt refreshingly light now. For the first time since the breakup, I laughed, genuinely, feeling a warmth spread through me that wasn't tinged with bitterness. At some point in the conversation, she asked about my work, and I caught myself instinctively glancing down, my hand brushing the spot where my wedding ring used to be. Old habits die hard. But as I looked back up at her, I saw only curiosity in her eyes, not judgment or assumptions, just the simple interest of one person in another. There was something healing in that moment, a reminder that life could move forward without dragging the past along. We talked for hours, and as the night wore on, I found myself opening up, sharing bits of my life without feeling the weight of the betrayal hanging over me. With each word, each laugh, I felt the power of letting go, of moving beyond the pain. At the end of the night, we exchanged numbers. There were no promises, no expectations, just a spark, the faintest hint of something new, something untainted by past mistakes. As I walked home, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not just hope in love or trust, but hope in myself. The pieces of my life were slowly coming back together, forming something stronger, something that could withstand the storms and shadows of the past. When I reached my door, I paused, looking back out into the night, and a quiet sense of peace settled over me. I had survived. I had been shattered, but I hadn't lost myself. In the ruins of what once was, I was building something new, something real. And for the first time in a long time, I was truly free. As days turned into weeks, the sharp edges of Anna's betrayal softened. Memories of us still resurfaced, uninvited and bittersweet, but they no longer had the power to gut me. They became faint echoes, remnants of a life that felt like someone else's. With each passing day, I found myself growing, shifting, letting go. My conversations with Mia continued, evolving from casual text to genuine discussions that filled the quiet moments I used to dread. I'd thought I was done with connection, too bruised to reach out again, but she changed that. She had a way of asking questions that made me stop and consider who I was, not just who I'd been with Anna. And more than that, she made me laugh, a real laugh, not the forced chuckles I'd given out for months just trying to survive. One evening, Mia invited me to join her for a hike. The invitation surprised me. I'd never been much for the outdoors. But there was something about the idea of doing something completely different that felt like a necessary break from the past. I wanted to challenge myself, to shake off the remnants of what Anna's betrayal had left behind. We met early on a Saturday morning, the air crisp with the scent of pine and earth. Mia was waiting by the trailhead, her smile warm and inviting. "Ready for some fresh air?" she asked, her eyes glinting with a playfulness I hadn't realized I'd missed. I nodded, feeling an unfamiliar excitement brewing inside me. As we started up the trail, the conversation flowed easily, interwoven with laughter and comfortable silences. At one point, she looked over at me, her expression thoughtful. "You know, it takes courage to trust again," she said, almost as if reading my mind. I hesitated, letting her words sink in. "I'm still figuring that out," I admitted. "Some days I feel like I've moved past it. Other days, I wonder if the scars will ever really fade." Mia nodded, her gaze steady. "Scars fade," she said softly, "but they never fully disappear. They just become part of who we are." Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. I realized I'd been trying to erase the past, to wipe it clean as if it never existed. But maybe that wasn't the answer. Maybe the answer was learning to carry those scars without letting them define me. As we climbed higher, the trail grew steeper, demanding more focus, more effort. The physical challenge felt good, like a metaphor for the work I'd been doing internally. Step by step, breath by breath, I felt myself shedding pieces of the hurt, leaving them behind on the trail like stones dropped from a heavy bag. At the summit, we paused to catch our breath and take in the view. The world stretched out before us, vast and open, a reminder of all the possibilities waiting ahead. I felt small but free, like I was part of something bigger than myself, bigger than the pain I'd carried. Mia looked over at me, a gentle smile on her face. "You okay?" I nodded, feeling the weight of my emotions catch in my throat. "Better than okay," I said, and for the first time, I meant it. We stood there in silence, just letting the moment settle. I didn't feel the need to explain myself or hide the parts of me that were still healing. She understood, without words, that I was a work in progress. And somehow, that was enough. Later, as we made our way down the trail, Mia reached out and took my hand, her touch warm and steady. I felt a surge of gratitude, not just for her presence, but for the chance to rebuild. I'd been broken, yes, but in that brokenness, I discovered something I never knew I had, a resilience, a quiet strength that couldn't be taken away by betrayal. As the trail leveled out and the parking lot came into view, I knew I was leaving something behind on that mountain, a part of me that had been holding on too tightly, clinging to a life that no longer existed. I was walking away lighter, free to create something new without the weight of the past pulling me down. Mia and I stood by our cars, lingering in the final moments of the day. She squeezed my hand one last time, a silent acknowledgement of the journey we'd both just taken, both together and apart. "Thank you," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "For today. For everything." She smiled, her eyes warm with understanding. "You don't have to thank me," she replied. "This is all you. You're the one who decided to climb." As I drove home, her words echoed in my mind. "You're the one who decided to climb." The past would always be a part of me, a shadow on the path I'd walked. But now it was just that, a shadow. I was the one setting my direction, choosing my steps, building something new from the ground up. And as I turned the key to my front door, stepping into the quiet warmth of my home, I felt a sense of peace, the kind that only comes from knowing that, finally, I was moving forward. For the first time, I was truly ready to embrace the new beginning I'd been building all along.